Right, let's go ahead and get started. First and foremost, welcome to everybody who's participating. I see the attendees numbers going up quickly. That's fantastic news. We're happy to have you here today. My name is Randy Trask. I'm with the New Mexico Trade Alliance. We are a nonprofit organization here in New Mexico that works with local and state government to provide any and kind of every sort of international business assistance that New Mexico companies may need. A lot of that assistance that we provide, we do through our network of experts. We don't try to solve issues that we have experts in the state that can help you with. And today's webinar is an example of just that. We've got two folks we'd like to introduce you to. So a very special thank you to Melanie Wiwi with Team Worldwide Albuquerque and Oscar Quinones with Global Supply Chain Consultants, who we're going to have a little bit of a conversation with later on. But before we get started, I want to thank our partners and sponsors, our main sponsor, the one that made this possible today, State of New Mexico Economic Development Department. We have Sarah Gutierrez, the Deputy Division Director here, who's going to give us some words here in just a second. We also have Mr. Rob Zur with he's got a couple of hats. He's with Bohannon Houston and has a lot of international business experience himself, but he also is the chair of the International Trade Committee for the Albuquerque Hispano Chamber of Commerce, who is a partner of ours in organizing this. Welcome, Rob. We'll hear from you in just a little bit here as well. And of course, we always like to thank and mention the City of Albuquerque and Bernalillo County's Economic Development Departments, who fund us annually, helping keep our services free for New Mexico businesses. So with that, if I could turn it over to Sarah, if you could give us a quick welcome, we would greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Randy, and welcome everyone. Thank you to the panelists and to our attendees for making the time to join us today. I think that you're going to find that there's lots of useful information in the content today. As Randy said, I'm Sarah Gutierrez. I'm the Deputy Division Director with Economic Development Department. And the department works with businesses and communities to help build their capacity for expansion and growth, and in the case of communities, attracting economic development projects. And part of that mix is international development, or international trade, excuse me. And so we're thrilled to be partnering with the New Mexico Trade Alliance on our international trade initiatives, specifically the STEP grant, the State Trade Extension program that Randy will be talking a little bit about later on. The department also has various teams that work with businesses and communities firsthand. So we've got our job training incentive program that works with companies to develop workforce and workforce training. We have our finance development team that connects companies with financing opportunities, and our regional reps are located throughout the state and serve as our liaisons, our feet on the ground, to work with communities and businesses and connect them to all those various resources. Those are the highlights. We have various other programs within the division, and we hope that you would reach out to us for any of your business needs. We'll help you find the resource or the program that's right for you. So thank you very much again for being here today, and I'm really looking forward to seeing the presentation.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah, and thanks again for funding these programs. I always like to say in economic development, the export assistance side is always the side that seems to have the most resources that are available to companies. So the more we can get the word out, the better. So thank you. Rob, would you like to say a few words on behalf of the Hispano?
Sure, I'll keep it brief. As Randy mentioned, I'm Rob Zur. I serve currently on the Hispano Chambers board. I'm also serving as the chair of our International Trade Committee. I think really appreciate you, Randy and Celeste, for organizing this kind of event. I think it's great for our members. International trade, as everyone knows, is a key component to economic development within our state and our region. And so really looking forward to what the panelists have to offer today and the discussion, because I think our members at the Hispano Chamber certainly are always looking for the resources, information about the logistics. And so really want to thank you guys again for organizing this and putting this webinar on.
Thanks, Rob, and anybody out there that, you know, it's not just the individual experts that cover certain areas, but folks with a lot of experience. So I know Rob, through his support of the Chamber and economic development and the business community in general, is always available. He's done some really cool deals in Mexico. They had a really big project that they did with the Japanese company here recently. So, you know, if you ever need a sounding board with a guy that's got a lot of experience, I'm sure Rob would be happy to chat with you.
Oh yeah, glad to do that.
Before we start our conversation with Melanie and Oscar, I wanted to quickly go over the STEP grant that Sarah had mentioned earlier. We try to plug this anytime we can because it's literally free money that's available to help companies try and export. With that, I'll mention Celeste Nunez, who is with us, and she's oversees this program. Unfortunately, Celeste is feeling a little under the weather. So I'm going to go ahead and go over it with her and spare her voice and her cough that she's dealing with. So with that, let me transition over to a slideshow really quickly. Can everybody see this of my panelists? Okay, excellent.
Yes.
Great. Let me just see if I can pull this full screen, make it a little bit easier. Okay. So the New Mexico STEP Grant is a program that we are really fortunate to have. Sarah's team over at the state applies for this annually, and they're funds that come from the SBA. Over the last couple of years, they've gotten much easier to use, and you can use them for a lot more different types of international business development activities. The goal for any of these programs that they are willing to fund has to be to generate international sales. So companies need to be at a point where they're ready to try and find customers or partners or distributors abroad. But as long as you're at that point, it's pretty flexible in terms of what you can use it for. So first, let's talk a little bit about the eligibility. Companies that want to use these funds need to be registered with the state of New Mexico. So they don't have to be could be a Delaware company, but they have to be operating in New Mexico and registered with the state's tax and rev department. The goods that they manufacture, services are easy, of course, because they don't have content, but goods themselves have to have 51% US content. So 51% of what goes into those products that are made have to come from the US. They have to have been in operation for at least 1 year. So not for startups, but still relatively young companies. And the goal is to help as many small businesses as possible. And by small, the federal, this always makes me chuckle a little bit. The federal definition for small businesses is 500 employees or less, which kind of just wraps up almost every business in the state. So that one's usually pretty easy for our companies to meet. What activities can you use? And these are just a sampling of the activities. There's other ones, and we can always discuss this on a case-by-case basis. I always recommend that you reach out to us and that we can do a little bit of a consultation with you and help you explore different ways you could use the funds. But also it helps us also understand maybe other areas of your business where there are programs, maybe not even trade or export related programs that the department, the economic development department at the state may offer, or other organizations that you might not be familiar with. First major one is trade shows. This can be in person or virtual. So if you're interested in attending a trade show, as long as we can prove that it has a significant international buyer contingent, then it's eligible. So it could be a trade show abroad, but it could also be a domestic trade show. For example, we have 4 healthcare related companies that are going to the Florida International Medical Expo here at the end of September. and that's being paid for with STEP funds because it's an international show, even though it's being held domestically. Virtual also virtual trade shows are eligible as well. Funds can be secured up to $10,000. This is reimbursable. All of the funds that you receive through this program, you have to pay for up front, but as soon as you complete whatever it is that you were requesting funds for, you can get reimbursed. So trade shows, that's can be anything from the booth to paying for the electricity at the booth, to the furniture that you need, to the marketing and graphics that you're putting at the show. And as you know, 10,000 will cover most of an entry-level booth and related expenses. In New Mexico, we don't cover travel or personal expenses, but it leaves a lot more budget to be able to cover that part with us covering the trade show. Website optimization, anything that you could do to your website to make it more attractive globally for customers to find you. It could be specific search engine optimization, localization, things like that, but it could also be redoing your website entirely, better photography of your products, really creating a globally attractive website that's going to make you look like the type of company that folks want to procure from. Market research, we can hire consultants throughout the world. If you're not quite sure which market is best for you, we can connect you to consultants that can help do market research. Also business matchmaking. If you've got a couple of markets identified where you think there's opportunity, we can hire either the U.S. Department of Commerce or some of these folks to go out and actually nail down a list of 5 to 10 warm leads for you of potential customers. And lastly, and this is a new one we're excited about, product registration. Lots of companies, in order to be able to sell, need let's say a CE mark in Europe or something like that. We can apply up to $6,000 to the cost of the consultant that would help you register your products. We have a very small window for a special opportunity now. Between now and the end of September, we can stack initiatives. So ordinarily, you'd be limited to around $10,000 in one major initiative per year. You can come back year after year. But for right now, due to some extra funds that we don't want to revert back due to COVID, you can request multiple, even up to 3 of these different programs. Maybe you want to do a trade show and a website optimization. You can do that, and it's allowable right now. Just don't hesitate to reach out to us to find out more about that. Just to finish up real quick, it's a very simple process. You show us proof of the cost. There's you provide a quote on your letterhead about what it is that you're going to spend and why. We help you fill out a couple of SBA forms. You get set up as a vendor and you're issued a PO number, and then at that point, you can invoice the state for reimbursement if you've been approved and issued a PO after the service, or in the case of a trade show, the trade show was complete and paid for. I put Celeste's contact in here. She's the one in charge of all of this, so we can also type it into Celeste if you want to type it into the chat box for anybody that's interested. Great. So with that, we'll go ahead and move into our conversation with our experts here today. Rather than do PowerPoint presentations, we thought that this might be with the Zoom fatigue that everybody is experiencing these days. It might be a little bit more palatable to have a conversation and kind of just delve into some areas and feel where things go. I encourage you to type questions into the chat box if it's relevant to what we're talking about now. Otherwise, we'll have a little bit of time at the end for some Q&A. Let's go ahead and get started. So kind of starting on the shipping side before we really get into supply chain logistics. You know, a lot of companies, Melanie, and this is probably to start with you, a lot of companies sell domestically and they get interest from international customers, potential international customers, but they have no clue what changes from shipping to your customer in Wisconsin to shipping to your customer in the UK. What changes? What more do you have to do? How could you get in trouble? What happens the second that product leaves U.S. territory and enters another country's customs?
I think the first biggest difference is the risk that you are now going to be assuming. So then there's the documentation requirements. You now have to create a commercial invoice, a packing list, which you may already do domestically, But for international exports, you may be required to have a certificate of origin, depending on the country you're exporting to. You will have to complete a shipper's letter of instruction, which allows a freight forwarder to file your electronic export information, which is required for statistical purposes for US Census. Then you will also have compliance issues because now you're dealing with a totally different country. So they may have regulations in order to import your product. So knowing what your commodity is, if it's regulated by both United States, and it could also be regulated by the country that you're exporting to. Some of those things are high technology, military items, ammunition. Even at the moment, for COVID, I'm losing the word for that, all of our PPE. So that was being limited to be exported as well. So you would have had to have permission to export that product. Another big difference is a language barrier. You're dealing with the Chinese, you're dealing with the Russians, Mexico, yes, Spanish, many people do speak Spanish, but most people internationally do speak English, but it may not be as good. And so there's always a tendency for miscommunication. So that's also something that's different. And then of course, your currency fluctuations. If your customer is going to pay you in USD, if they're asking that they be able to remit funds in their currency. So how you need to deal with that and make sure you take that into account of the cost of your product. There's quite a few differences.
Yeah, it's hard for a lot of companies because I think, especially e-commerce based companies, they'll start shipping and not realize that they're kind of shipping things as if they were gifts to their clients, not doing any of the paperwork. And you know what, in small quantities, a lot of times it gets through. And then all of a sudden one day somebody figures out, okay, there's some volume coming from this person. And then they start looking into it and all of a sudden they're in trouble because they did things wrong from the beginning. But on the other hand, we talk to a lot of companies who want to do the right thing and they go with UPS and FedEx, who offer these kind of general support systems for small businesses to be able to ship internationally. And what we've heard a lot is that it works for some companies, but many companies, if they have a question, it's a different agent that they have to deal with every time that doesn't have the history of the company. So they don't understand the nuances of what the company's already done to be where they're at, or sometimes they can't get a hold of anybody at all. They're not always sure that the pricing is the most competitive for what they're trying to do. And, the margins are so important for these small businesses. So,
if I may, Randy, on that particular point, with regards to pricing, one of the things that other companies also need to take into account, Melanie talked about all of the compliance and things that you need to go to, and sometimes language barriers. If you've got a perishable though that you're sending across, you need to understand how long that thing is going to take. Or if you've committed to a delivery timeline of, hey, you're going to have your widgets in 2 weeks, and then it gets stuck in customs because your paperwork isn't filled out correctly, or you didn't hire Melanie to get all of your export information correct. It could get stuck for months. I've worked for high-tech companies, where we've had shipments stuck for months, and it was aluminum casings for laptops, and we couldn't do anything about it because we had filled out, the supplier had filled out, it was an import sort of an issue, but even from an export side, you can run into that. So
yeah, and even on the pricing side, we've noticed folks think that they can apply similar pricing on what they were selling domestically, especially let's say e-commerce based businesses. Yeah. And then they realize what the cost of shipping is, and then they realize they've been quoting incorrectly and now have to go back and ask for more money. So, so that's a good transition to my next question, which is a lot of companies don't know that independent customs brokers or freight forwarders within their communities that they can reach out to and get to know personally and meet in person, that they even exist, or what they provide. Everyone's kind of just used to to the FedExes and the UPSs and the DHLs. So Melanie, tell us a little bit more about what you do and your role and how you address all those different things that you mentioned at the beginning.
Sure. So when I started in this industry back in 2000, I think it was explained to me what a freight forwarder is, and this is the best analogy that I like, is that a freight forwarder is a travel agent for freight. So not only do we manage the transportation from point A to point B, but we make sure that your freight has the documents that it needs to travel along with it. So when it gets to arrival, it can clear customs, just like when you're traveling, you show your passport, customs says, come on into the country. You've got so the documentation, and then also when it arrives to an airport, facilitating the final transfer or to the port. So it's not just a matter of getting from the big ports, or big airports, but we can actually handle the final mile, pick it up from a warehouse and deliver it to a warehouse in China. So we facilitate that whole process and make sure that you remain compliant, not only with US regulations, but knowing where you're shipping to, who you are shipping to. That's one of the things you want to make sure you know who your customers are, especially if you have a sensitive product. You want to make sure it's going into the right hands. And the US government actually will track that as well. When we file your electronic export information, they want to know that it's a known quantity at the destination. So we make sure that it's all your I's are dotted, your T's are crossed, you've got the proper documentation, and knowing what your expectation is for transit time. If you have a perishable and it absolutely has to be there within 24 hours, make sure that we're using the correct mode of transport, the correct carrier that can handle it, that has a cooler at origin, a cooler at destination, so your goods arrive as they are intended. So we help. We're here to answer your questions, and we ask a lot of questions as well, because we need a lot of information to be able to help you do the right thing.
And if something happens, they're not trying to figure out how to deal with it themselves. They call Melanie and they go, Melanie, my product is stuck. What's going on?
Right. That's from your supply chain side. That's one of the best things about a freight forwarder. And then if I may, I'm going to poke a little fun at Melanie here in that.
Sure.
When you're in a business and you've got a supply chain and you're trying to get stuff out, your freight forwarder can become a little bit of an annoyance. In that you're saying, hey, I need to send this widget, and then they're going to say, okay, what's the widget made out of? Well, this. Okay, what schedule is it on for this sort of item? And you're like, I don't know. And then they help you guide, they help you kind of work through that process. But then it ends up being kind of a muscle memory sort of a thing as you grow more and more into it. Freight forwarders become great partners in that, you can start setting up templates for similar products, and then it just becomes kind of an off-the-shelf sort of a thing, and it becomes automatic. You're using that muscle, and it starts getting easier and easier. And then, but the freight forwarder at first, you're like, oh my gosh, this person will not stop asking questions. I just wanted to check.
Well, Oscar, it's prior proper preparation prevents piss poor performance. So the more information we have up front, the better. Because if you just give me a product and I say, when does it need to be there? I put on the slow boat to China. And right now, believe me, it would take a long time to get there.
Right.
But yeah, knowing what the expectation is. So I can say, look, it's that hot. We need to air freight it. We can air freight some of it and put the rest on a boat. If your customer needs it, you've got a production line down situation. So just understanding and having that relationship and conversation to understand what you're trying to accomplish. So I can help you do that.
Yep. They become, and then like Randy was saying earlier, it becomes that one throat to choke. If you filled out all your paperwork and then all of a sudden you've got a problem with the 3PL in China, third-party logistics partner in China, you're not having to call, Dongguan and speak to, somebody on the phone over there. What you do is you call Melanie. You say, hey, what's up? And then she's on it. So,
Well, typically, the way freight forwarders operate, we're part of a global consortium. I mean, Team Worldwide itself has over 40 offices in the United States. We also have Team fully owned offices in China. So, if we don't have an office there, I do have a connection with an agent. And before I ever ship anything out of the United States, I am in contact with the destination saying, this is what I'm shipping. Here are my documents. You tell me, are these okay? Do I need anything else? Because those guys at destination, they understand their own country regulations, and they'll come back and say, I need this, I need this. And they'll tell us. So we definitely want to do that before we ever start shipping something, because it's much easier to fix it before it's ever left the supplier's warehouse versus trying to fix it at destination. Because then you're dealing with delays, and delays just cause money, and you're just trying to avoid.
And that's what you just described as something that the shipper cannot do by themselves. So
correct.
If they get in trouble, their options are very, very limited, and a lot of times that's a write-off that has disappeared, and you're not dealing with it anymore without the help of a professional to help you. Melanie, let me switch directions here. We also get a lot of questions about importing.
Yes.
A couple of different areas that we get a lot of questions around. One is that they are very unhappy dealing with the freight forwarders or 3PLs that the foreign
Yes.
that the supplier is wanting to use, and they
Sure.
don't know if they can use their own or not, is one. And two, we have many folks that want to cut out the broker middlemen that are basically, they're purchasing stuff. There's a third party broker that's, tacking on and their cost
Sure.
to it, and they're paying much more than if they just sourced stuff directly from the manufacturers, and they know who they are, and they can figure out how to get a hold of them. But they're scared because they don't know where to begin to try and start that process if they were to source it directly. So can you touch
Sure.
that for us a little bit?
So as far as trying to cut out the middleman and the buying commission, there's a couple of things to consider. Some manufacturers, especially some of the small guys, like in Mexico, a lot of the handicrafts and artwork, a lot of those mom and pop shops use a buyer or a purchasing agent because they don't want to register with the government, because there's more paperwork that's involved. It puts them on the tax radar, or they're not big enough. So they will have sell their goods to Mr. Smith, who will then sell them abroad internationally for them. And Mr. Smith will take care of all the export documentation, the shipper's letter, the commercial invoice and packing list. So that's one scenario where you're going to have to deal with a buying agent. The other scenario is, like you talk about, the big manufacturer reps. It depends on the relationship between the supplier and the manufacturer's rep, the buyer. They may have a specific agreement and that in their contract that you cannot go directly to the supplier. So even if you go to the supplier, they'd say, sorry, you got to deal with, Mr. Smith. He's our guy. So it depends. You need to ask those questions. Usually there is a buyer involved for some specific reason, and it's usually contractual. So there may not be a way around that.
So let's say in some cases we've had, we've talked to the manufacturer, they don't have exclusivity with the supplier in the US. They'd be willing to sell to us directly. And this has been Chinese suppliers in many cases.
Sure.
We're terrified to try and do this ourselves directly because we don't know what we're doing. Could they call you to help them figure that out?
Yes. And you would definitely, you wouldn't be able to do it by yourself, because you as a company, unless you have your own IATA number, which is for air freighter, your own NVO, your FMC number, you would have to hire a company that is able to issue those bills of lading for transport. So to your point about they feel like, as an importer, that you're being told that the supplier is going to choose the freight forwarder, and you don't like that because you lose the visibility of it. And they'll say, don't worry, we'll pay for the freight, but obviously that's rolled into the cost of the goods, or they'll be line itemed out on your invoice. Where you want to start that conversation is with Incoterms, because those are, they're international commercial terms. They're generally accepted. The current one is Incoterms 2020. They're updated every 10 years to reflect the current state of international trade. For example, when they added the importer security filing requirement about 10 years ago, that is now a line item on the Incoterm. And again, the Incoterm chart, and I'm happy to send that out to everybody, it just lists the responsibilities between the buyer and the seller. So, you can go all the way from Ex Works, where basically the supplier just makes the goods available at their warehouse and you are responsible for all the other charges, which is not a problem if you have a freight forwarder, because you would contact me. I would work with the agent in China. They would get to work with the supplier, say, supplier, we're going to come pick up the goods from your warehouse and we're going to move it to Albuquerque. So, to be able to control the freight, to control the shipment, to choose who you want to work with as an importer, you want to negotiate the Incoterms. And then you would have control over it. You would contact me. I would get in contact with your supplier and we would start moving the freight from there. But you would be responsible to pay either all of the charges or some of the charges, depending on which Incoterm you select. The other thing with Incoterms, it's also the transfer of risk. So cargo insurance is very important. You as an importer can buy cargo insurance, have your own blanket policy, just like you have business owners insurance or you have car insurance. But Freight Forwarder Team Worldwide, we do offer cargo insurance. You can buy that on a shipment by shipment basis. And so that covers what they call 110% of CIF value. So basically you take the cost of your goods, the cost of the insurance, cost of the freight, add 10% to that, your premium's calculated on that, but it would cover, in the case of a loss, all of those costs. Mm-hmm. Without cargo insurance, a lot of people think, well, the bill of lading, the carrier is going to, reimburse me. Carrier liability is $500 per shipping unit in ocean. So if you're on a vessel that, if you're in the Suez Canal and those guys all got screwed on that too. Sorry, that's general average. If a ship was in peril and they had to throw containers overboard and yours got thrown overboard, the carrier's only going to give you $500 without cargo insurance.
Wow.
So, or if there's an explosion because somebody put fireworks on it and didn't declare it, and there's a big fire and containers get destroyed, the carrier is only liable for $500. So, insurance is another big thing you want to consider when you are transporting goods internationally. And the way to have more control over that is designating the Incoterms with your supplier. So you are in control of that. The cargo insurance is issued in your name and you will be refunded for those. You would file the claim, but you would get the benefit of that.
And that's a huge point you're making there, because people don't realize how many different options they have, or that they have the ability to negotiate. So they think that they're stuck with whatever Incoterm the supplier wants to do. And what they're doing is they're obviously giving the term that's most suitable and beneficial for the supplier, and they don't even realize that that's what's happening to them. So that's a very important point.
We also, in that regard too, just if you do change the Incoterm, make sure the cost of your goods change. Because if your supplier is saying, I'm going to pay to get it all the way to your door and it's going to cost you $10 a piece, and you go back and say, you know what, no, I want to use my freight forwarder, I want to use Melanie, so we're going to change the terms to Ex Works, your price should reduce significantly and reflect that your supplier is no longer paying for anything but to make it available to be picked.
Right.
So you need to pay attention to that.
That's actually one of the things that I was going to say, is that's where I would come in that, if you're contracting with, Hanhai out of China, and China's and Hanhai is telling you, I want, we're going to deliver this Ex Works. Well, okay. So Ex Works literally means at the dock, after it's packaged, at the dock, if it falls from loading it from that dock into your truck, Melanie becomes responsible, or basically you become responsible, because you as the company decided that Ex Works was what you were agreed to. So Ex Works is a way to lower the cost of your finished good, but then you take on that burden of responsibility of should anything happen. And what I would recommend, and I think Melanie was kind of getting to it, is the other extreme, which would be delivered duty paid, which is DDP. And so DDP on Incoterms is kind of almost like fire and forget. There's still some liability on your part, because if the
Yeah, but you don't want to do DDP, Oscar.
well,
Not into the US, because in the US, if you do DDP, you have to have an importer of record.
right.
And if the US company doesn't agree to be the importer of record, then you got to get a foreign POA. Then,
Right. Well, so
yeah, there's a lot. DDP is not, I mean, yes, it's fire and forget it, but it's not, the importer is still on the hook for declaring the HTS code. It goes on their record, and I would just, those are not fun. It's just, it's not ideal. I don't recommend people to do that.
So this is where kind of Melanie and I would go back and forth for the goods, and making sure that what we've done is in the best interest of the company,
Sure.
right?
Oh, that's
Right.
great.
So
That's great.
one of the things would be, hey, look, fire and forget, and yeah, there is some paperwork that you need to have in place, but your liability at that point becomes the fact that, okay, it needs to hit U.S. Customs, and then actually even after that, it needs to hit your facility. And so there's trade-offs there that Melanie is exactly right in that you need to discuss and make sure that you as a company are aware of.
So kind of on that note of from Customs Beyond, we have a question that just came through. Someone has had a lot of issues with the last leg of transportation post customs, getting actually to the door of the customer, and their interest is in what a freight forwarder or customs broker, what that relationship might look like with that last leg, that last provider, in the case that it might be somebody different. How do you address those types of issues?
So Team Worldwide, I'm a licensed customs broker. We are a brokerage firm as well, so we also have brokers in Texas. I work very closely with Deanne Brown, who is here in New Mexico. I think we're the only 2 licensed brokers in the state. Deanne's been doing this for 40 years. She's been doing a lot longer than I have. So we work very closely together. So if Team handles the freight and Deanne is going to be the broker, I'm in constant communication with her as to providing her information when it's going to arrive. I need to give her other information from the shipment so she can complete the customs entry. And then once it's released, she gives me the release. I have to call Albuquerque Customs here at the airport and say, yes, it's released. Okay, great, good. And then if we're in control of the final delivery, then I've got the paperwork and we just make the delivery. So I know some customers are dealing with their they don't know who their broker is or don't have a good relationship. And to have a good relationship with a customs broker is very important, because not only will they CYA for you, because there is such a thing as informed compliance, you as the importer are responsible to declare what the classification of your goods are.
And I think,
Okay.
Melanie, this might be more of an exporter question. So if you were to handle for this company, would it be Team Worldwide that would be handling it from door to door, or how do you deal with that last leg? Because they mentioned issues with.
Oh, you mean for a
handling-
destination?
Exactly,
Okay, yes.
handling delays,
Yep.
but
Sure.
post customs.
So that again comes back to our relationship that we have with our agents globally, or with our own offices, such as in China and Taiwan. That again, I don't send anything out of here until I've contacted my guys at destination, given them a heads up with the paperwork, the bill of lading, asking them, is this okay to move? Is there any other requirement that's needed? And then when they clear customs, and again, it depends. It is the reverse. So if Team is handling the freight and it gets to destination in China, and your customer has their own customs broker and they don't want to use Team China, then our office and team office in China will work with your customer's broker to coordinate that release and then make the final delivery. So again, if you're in control of the shipment,
You can help So I guess just kind of just thinking through this, if they've been having problems, I'm not really sure what they've been using or who they've been using to ship now, but let's say they came to you and they explained this was an issue. Could you help them manage their shipping all the way down to the last leg so that you would have as much control as possible over that last portion?
In so much as I know who their customs broker is. Because again, if our office is turning over documents to an outside broker,
Mhm.
they're at their mercy to have the broker file the entry on time,
Okay.
the release back to our office so we could move the freight.
Okay.
You know, it's always, it's about relationships, you know, and if they insist to use their own broker, and that's fine, and they have every right to do that, just as you would as an importer.
Mhm.
It's just that communication to make sure that they're doing, that the brokers what they need to do timely, so we can make the final delivery.
So
Yeah.
Matthew has to ask that question. Matthew, I would recommend that you reach out maybe and talk to Melanie directly about the specific challenges
Sure.
you're facing. And I'm sure she'd be happy to try and figure out if there was a solution to help you maybe
Thank you,
approach it
Celeste.
differently.
Yeah, I was gonna say just to add to that, that's where being Ex Works is in your favor, Matthew. Is if you're exporting Ex Works, what you if you're customer, you got to balance your customer service, right? So, but if you're delivering your product Ex Works, you can leave it at your dock and then say, okay, you come get it.
Yeah.
You come get it and you deal with it. Or you do, I think the Incoterm is FOB, and basically once it hits their soil, their
FOB's origin. So it'd be FOB Los Angeles or FOB Albuquerque, you know, and FOB is always the origin destination. So you are agreeing to pay to get the freight to deliver it to the CFS station in Los Angeles, or to deliver it to the airport. FOB is an ocean term, so it'd be FCA for air. So yeah, you can definitely switch some of that up. If you wanted to pay to get it to destination, to be CFR or CIF to Shanghai port, and then they take it from there.
And then that way you could say, oh, I've delivered it to the country that you're requesting.
Yeah.
You're in charge of that last mile.
Right.
And so it's a way to, again, it's not the best customer service experience in that if I order something from you and you're telling me, oh, well, I've delivered it to your facility. But, it's a way to kind of mitigate your risk for your business. And so, that's where I think, not to toot my own horn, but I think that's where kind of hiring somebody like me who can help you kind of navigate some of
I was just gonna say, speaking of risk.
Yeah.
So Oscar, not only has everybody, regardless of what you're doing right now, just seen endless articles about major supply chain disruptions because of COVID over the last year. I sit on the board for a credit union, and the person that was responsible for indirect lending showed us a picture of like 700 Ford F-150s parked on a runway that are completely built but can't be sent off because they're missing their microchip, their semiconductor chip. We've got just the cost of lumber right now. The people don't even understand, because we're just barely starting to see the price increases associated with this massive supply chain disruption that's been happening for months now. And I think a lot of people, when they think of supply chain, they think you have to be an IBM or you have to be a giant company to think about that. But that's not true. So talk to us a little bit about how small businesses can mitigate risk of losing suppliers and work on strategies that give them more favorable terms with their suppliers, and managing inventory, and kind of where that whole profession comes into play.
Yeah, so sometimes people think supply chain is a very broad term, right? So Melanie handles one aspect of supply chain, I handle other aspects of supply chain, and they're all very kind of intermarried. Some people, I use supply chain kind of interchangeably with even operations, right? So manufacturing operations, how things are coming in and how they're going out. Basically, supply chain is like saying business.
I'm gonna major in business.
right. But Melanie, I'm sure you're familiar with it. People, you say, "Oh, I'm a customs broker." They're like, "Oh, well, you just handle the little certificates." Like, no, that's not what I do. And so I think one of the things that people don't understand is, or maybe not don't understand, but kind of maybe oversimplify, is that all I need to do is hire FedEx and get my stuff out. All I need to do is build it, and then hire FedEx, and then it's out, and then I'm done. That is something you could do. It's probably going to cost you money. It's probably going to cost you time and headaches. And if you're not thinking about how you're actually processing what's coming in and what risk is there and how your little corner of the world might be affected by, I don't know, a semiconductor factory fire, and how it might affect your output of things. If there is a global pandemic and you're thinking about, oh crap, I need to, I need to think about how cost of labor, how I'm going to be able to operate in this world is going to work. That's actually to the point that Randy was making. That's what happened with lumber. Lumber is a very manual process, right? And so, yeah, you see a lot of automation in it, but it's still very manual. And if you don't have people out there cutting trees, it's not that there was a shortage of trees all of a sudden. It's that people weren't working is what it was. And so now we're starting to see lumber prices fall back down. But you need to be able to kind of think about that. And if you're not thinking ahead about how you're mitigating risk in your supply chain of purchasing things for building, that's something that you need to think about. The problem is that if you hoard, that's going to cost money for inventory, right? So it's going to tie up money, and you need to be able to balance that out. These are all pretty basic things that can be difficult to navigate. And with something like COVID, very few people could, very few people could predict that, right? There are people that once it started happening, people were worried about toilet paper and firearms. And so there was a big run on that stuff. They didn't think about how it might affect their business, right? And so that's some of the stuff that you can do through contracts. You can do through huge, basically relationships as well, which sounds dumb. But there's still a lot of business that happens over coffee. And New Mexico has a lot of that. I would say that's good to do, but having it documented is better.
Yeah,
because then you got
good contracts. I think what happened, well, I mean, COVID was a big wake-up call that, people didn't think they needed to have a supply chain strategy. And
Right.
If they did, they maybe had a little bit, but it was far down on the list. I mean, if you're talking about a serious analysis of what's coming in, what alternatives you have, macroeconomic, global issues that might impact what's happening. And I say that because, it's not just COVID. The world becomes smaller and smaller every day. Our ongoing struggles with China in particular, and increases in tariffs against China and vice versa, all these things are having a much more immediate impact on small businesses today than they ever did before. And so people who don't have a supply chain risk mitigation strategy, or people that prioritize it very, very far down on the list of things that they need to accomplish as part of their, like you said, operations, are probably in for, if they weren't woken up, then I'd be worried for them after COVID.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
so somebody like yourself, how do you work with a company to help them put that strategy together?
So, there's nothing better than a good little supply chain map. And that's literally thinking about what's coming in and, little block, all the components that build your product, and thinking about how that flows through the step. There's a process that Toyota made famous, Kaizen, and trying to be sure that you're doing, or JIT, just in time sort of deliveries of stuff. That puts a lot of pressure on your logistics, though, which Melanie probably doesn't like so much.
Not right now. I can't guarantee anything. Yeah, your ship's here. It's been sitting in LA for about 3 days, 4 days. We'll see if they get a berthing spot. Yeah, it's right now things are very, yeah. So as far as just in time, but it's also, I've been telling my customers especially with the prohibitive tariffs, the extra 25% on many of the Chinese goods, like, do you have an alternate supplier? Find an alternate supplier. Can you get this somewhere else? Because really buying this for one time, or you really need this, you're going to pay an extra 25%. It's going to be half the cost. Your duty is. Do you still want to do this? And they're like, I need it. I'm like, okay.
You can't wait until it hits the fan to do it, is the other important thing, right? We got tons of phone calls saying, can you find me a supplier in Mexico to replace my supplier of bottles? And our hearts from China, our hearts went out to them, and we did the best we could, but at that point, it's almost too late, and you're all the other people who are receiving from that supplier are all doing the same thing, right? It's that mad scramble. So that was the wake up.
I'll give you a perfect example. It doesn't happen to just small companies, right? So look at Ford. Right now with the microchips, like you'd said, I lived through a fire I didn't live through, but I worked through a fire that happened at an HDD factory, and actually also the flood that happened in Thailand after the tsunami. I couldn't get HDDs for my computers, for my servers. And so, and I was working for one of the largest cloud companies out there that rhymes with Casebook. And so I couldn't get HDDs, and I was calling, there were only 4 manufacturers at that time. And so if you didn't have a relationship with that manufacturer or a contract that said, I get priority, we were screwed. And we ended up firing one of them. And so we ended up getting our allotment from somewhere else. But it was, these aren't just things that happen to small companies. These are things that happen to large companies, and people get caught off guard. And so if you don't have those alternate suppliers, that mitigation kind of built in, there's a chance you're going to get caught flat-footed.
So Oscar, would you, if anybody had an interest, and I know there's lots of multipliers, I'm looking at this list of attendees here that work with a lot of different companies in their regions. If anybody wanted to just have a kind of an initial consultation to do a little bit of that mapping and see where they might be able to start addressing stuff, was that something that you'd be willing to provide for them?
Absolutely. I think that's something that I can help people kind of map out, and we can even bring in Melanie as it pertains to the logistics side of things. So,
awesome.
So I'm happy to do that.
So right now, as we have about 5 minutes left, I just want to open it up to the attendees. If anybody has a question, just raise your hand, and I can allow you to ask it directly. We'll just give people a couple minutes opportunity if they have anything specifically they want to ask. I know a lot of cases, it's your individual situations are complicated, and you've got these 2 resources here right now that you can reach out directly. They'd like for you to reach out to them. I also like to say, looks like Matthew wants to ask a question. I'm gonna go ahead and have him.
Hello.
Hey, Matthew, go ahead. We can hear you.
You can hear me? Okay, good. Yep. I always have questions. So I'm just curious if they wanted to talk about how Brexit is changing things.
Well, let me take a stab at this first, Melanie. So it's mucking things up, as my British friends would say. So it's because they're leaving the EU. they're starting to realize that there were some advantages to being a part of the EU with regards to one, logistics and customs, because now it's really not affecting us in the US so much unless you've got a reasons to go into just the UK.
But that wouldn't change it either, because even if you're exporting from the US into the UK, they've always done a customs entry for us.
Okay.
The biggest thing is is from the UK into the EU. And I lived in London for 10 years and I've just recently come back. So I was part of that whole industry. I worked for a company there, logistics. And over the years, past 4 years, customs officials have gone away. The border is open. It's quite easy. You can their biggest worry was, am I going to be able to take my pet across to Europe and get him back? So it wasn't only just people's passports, it was their pets, because they all take their dogs and cats onto the continent for a holiday. But they've actually had to rehire so many people for customs, and customs is a very specific knowledge base, and they've lost all of that because they've retired a lot of the HMRC guys, and they're probably trying to pull them out of retirement because they need them. So it's slowed trade down. People have been hoarded before that. So it's added another layer of complexity that was there 40 years ago that they've done away with. So it's just a big adjustment. But yes, it's not fun.
Yeah, and I would add that with regards to that, Matthew, it increased costs, right? So I found myself with a company that I was at trying to find somebody that could do what we were doing solely out of the UK in Europe. So I had the opposite problem, where the UK was building stuff and sending it into Europe, and then I said, oh shoot, now I need to figure out somebody in Holland or the Netherlands that can do it, because it's the biggest port of entry in Europe, right? So it's like, okay, and it ends up, almost by force, you figuring out your supply chain path and figuring out which way is going to be best. And so it's not, and I still don't think we've seen all the fallout from it, Melanie.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are.
They haven't even figured out Northern Ireland yet. That's a sticking point. And they're trying to say, let's do what the Swiss do, what Norway does. So they're part of the customs union, but they're not part of the European Union. But being part of the customs union, they are still subject to the guys in Belgium as for the EU, the Commission. So that's not going to work for the UK. I mean, they left because they didn't want to be part of the EU, but to still maintain their preferred trading, where no barriers, no documents. You can't have your cake and eat it too. So
that's where I was going to say.
Yeah, it was not explained very well. I mean, I understood what was going on because I'm a customs broker. I'm like, don't do it. You don't.
Right.
But many people, normal population, didn't understand that. To them, as we're leaving, no big deal, we're gone. It's like, no. You're going to have all kinds of problems. But I understood that because I'm in the business, but most people didn't. So
one of the things I did. Sorry, go ahead, man.
Yeah, just so I heard what you said, Melanie, that from the perspective of import, if you were selling to the UK before, which that doesn't really change.
Correct.
However, for example, our CE mark used to get us into the UK and the EU.
Correct.
And we understood, for example, that in the UK, there was some additional testing like PAT testing, but the customer would take care of that. So have you yet seen things where like a CE mark or some kind of certification like that is now not sufficient for import?
I would imagine that it will not be, because again, the UK has left the EU. Now, there could be some regulations, and that's what they were trying to do, is what could they pull over from the EU into the UK that made sense to keep things the same. They didn't want to totally throw everything out the door, but there's a laundry list. I mean, and that's not a priority. I think their biggest priority was air rights. Could airplanes enter and cross borders? So it's probably on the list of things to do. Matthew, what you could do is send me your question. I would reach out to my guys in London and ask them that question. If there's any specific documentation or publication that's come out about CE marks, if they're just going to make it grandfather that in and say, we're not changing it, or, oh no, we're going at completely 180 and we're going to make, now you got to do this.
I would venture a guess, Matthew, that the UK, and this is kind of where, again, we would have this discussion, Melanie and I, so this is actually great. I would venture a guess, and I would advise you that if the UK did that, they'd be cutting off their nose to spite their face, because that would mean that they would have to set up a regulatory body that can test all of these products that have now been sold, and there would be a halt of products being shipped into the UK because of that. So it's like saying RoHS or kind of certified by Underwriters Laboratory, right? And so, you've gotten some level of certification. And so I'm not going to say don't check, don't reach out and check and make sure that there's not going to be a change in the CE marking, or read the news or make sure you're up to date on that. But if they did that, that would be huge.
Yeah, but it's absolutely a political risk that is a trade barrier in itself, because of the uncertainty of what's going to happen, and they better get it worked out quickly, because that's a gigantic.
They've been working on it for 3 years.
Stranger things have happened, right? Everybody thought that'll never happen. They won't leave the EU, and then they did. So
Well, it's a very close vote, and I think did afterwards. People were like, "What? What did I just?"
So I love the conversation. This was a fantastic conversation. I really like this format. I think we'll do it again for sure. We are about 5 minutes past. We've got some folks dropping off. I don't want to keep people longer than we need to. I want to thank Melanie and Oscar again. This was amazing. We really appreciate your expertise, and for everybody that's out there paying attention, we have these resources in New Mexico. These are New Mexico-based individuals. And they're out there. So reach out to them if you need other experts. We'll get you to local people that you can talk to that can help you with your businesses. Thank you again, Sarah. Thank you, Rob. And we look forward.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.